Good evening and welcome to Raconteurs News. I'm Jason Holmes and this is 153. And good evening and welcome to Raconteurs News this Monday, the 22nd of January 2018, or 2018 I think is what we should be calling it. How are you doing? Hope you've had a great weekend and a good end of last week. It's been a weird one for me. I'm just going to tell you that maybe in future there may be a little bit of disruption. Over the weekend I suffered another a blood clot in an artery, an ischemia in my artery of my left leg now, which means I've got two shit legs rather than just the one that I had in the first place. So thank you very much to God for this. Is I think about the fourth mini stroke I've had, and I'm on 3 heart attacks. So thank you very much to you, God, and you're really looking after me. But I just wanted to I wanted to mention as well. When I went in on Saturday into the hospital, and I was quite shocked. The first woman that I was dealing with, the triage woman in the A&E, and I know that the people that work in there are under an enormous amount of stress and targets and things like that, and measures, and they're always being assessed and so it was very interesting for me to have a discussion with a woman who was decided that she was going to talk to me. I don't know why, but she decided she was going to talk to me about people with mobility cars, and she said that she doesn't know why they need them. It was brilliant being referred to as they, but by somebody who's sat in front of you, and they're talking about they, and you're part of that they. You're disabled, and there's some nurse sat in front of you, but she's obviously under a lot of stress. I don't want to cause her. I saw her for 5 minutes, but then the amount of things the NHS don't get right. And it's not the people that work in it, it's the system itself. I was taken from A&E down to a ward, a cardiac ward, a cardiovascular ward. I was taken down by a porter, and by the time I got down there, they said, we know nothing about you. Nobody's told you you're coming down. You've not been seen by a consultant, a cardiovascular consultant. So we're going to send you back. And I said, well, you're not sending me back because that porter's gone and I can't walk that far. So you're just going to have to do something from here. And she said, well, you'll have to go back to A&E. And I thought it was ridiculous. That first of all, that they got this procedure in place that I had to see somebody in A&E, a cardiovascular consultant, but I couldn't be taken down to the ward. I couldn't do that. I couldn't go and sit on the ward and do that. And to be fair, when I've been on that ward many, many times, and it's not the sort of ward that you want to go on. You know, when someone's having a shit 6 inches away from your head, and it's a really dirty, sloppy one, and you can smell it. That's not the sort of thing that you really want to be doing. But I was on that. I went on that ward, and it took a few hours. But I think they had to get a consultant off the golf course to come and do an assessment of me, and he diagnosed a chronic ischemia. So I've got a chronic ischemia in my left leg, which now accompanies the blood clot that I've got in my right leg, behind my right leg. So I'm completely disabled at the moment. I just can't walk really anyway. I struggle everything. There's not going to be any work for me for a while as well, which is, it's beside the point anyway. I'm self-employed, so I'm not going to be letting anybody down, but it's just that I can't. There's not going to be any work, but there's also going to be some surgeries involved as well, which is why I wanted to bring this up as well. So there's going to be some surgeries. There may be some disruption from those to the shows, but I'm hoping, beyond hope, to be able to get 2 shows a week on. I'm hoping to keep this going, keep 2 shows a week on. The good thing about not having to work is that I'll have more times to arrange the shows, and so we'll just have to wait and see what happens from there. But there you go. That's what happened to me this weekend. I hope your weekend was a little bit better. But I'd like to say as well a big thank you to my wife Danielle, who has been absolutely fantastic. When we realised that I got to go to the hospital, this is something that we've done many times before. She got a bag ready in no time. All my stuff was in there, my pyjamas, everything that I needed, a book, just everything I needed was in there within 5 minutes, and then we were on the way to the hospital. So big thank you to her. I don't think I'd be able to. I don't know what I'd do without her. So big thank you to you, Danielle. Right, anyway, let's get on to tonight. We've got a great show for tonight, and do you know what? I don't think I can handle it myself. So what I've done is I've drafted in a little bit of help, and I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to bring in I'm going to bring in my co-presenter for this evening, Andy Young. Andy, how are you doing, mate?
I'm doing well, mate. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back on the air again. And I'm just wondering, are you going to give Danielle a new job title? Because I think really you shouldn't be calling her your wife anymore. You should just be calling her your carer.
Yeah, she pretty much is that. Yeah, she is pretty much. How's your weekend been anyway? A bit better than mine.
Yeah, it's been cracking, mate. We did absolutely sweet FA. We were going to a motorbike show because there's somebody we wanted to meet, but we were both absolutely shattered. So we had feet up, pyjamas on all weekend, took it easy. We've had a day with the grandson today, so feeling fully refreshed and recharged.
Oh, brilliant. Well, listen, a big hello to everybody in the chat room as well, and people watching on Facebook Live. I hope this is coming through. I hope somebody give me some sort of feedback on whether it's coming through okay. So, Andy, we've got a great guest tonight, Gary Heseltine. We were due to have Larry Warren on tonight, wasn't we? But things have sort of got in our way. So, why don't you introduce our guest and just give us some background on what happened with Larry and what's going to be going on in the future, and then introduce our guest this evening.
Well, as far as I know, with Larry, I haven't managed to contact him, and given the circumstances, I didn't bother him by calling him on his mobile. I've got from Tino that he's started a new job and his shifts are all over the place, so he had to call off at the last minute. So fair enough. Hope you get things sorted out soon, Larry, and we're really looking forward to speaking to you. But tonight's guest is, and thanks for stepping in at the last minute, is Gary Heseltine. Gary, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are familiar with you, but can you just give us a bit of background for those that are not?
Okay, I'm the editor of UFO Truth Magazine, which has been running since I retired from the police in 2013. UFO Truth Magazine is an e-zine, 96 pages, bi-monthly every second month, and features articles by many of the world's leading researchers, people like Stanton Friedman, Nick Redfern from the States and Canada, respectively, Susan Hanson, New Zealand's top researcher, Mary Rodwell from Australia, Bill Chalker, top researcher from Australia, a whole host of people. And we also have guest articles by, certainly over the past, we've had Steve Bassett, we've had Richard Dolan, Peter Robbins, people like that. So it covers a whole gamut. I don't think you'll find a stronger lineup of contributors, whether as regular columnists or as occasional columnists. We've pretty much had everybody, even Graham Hancock's been in there, and Eric von Daniken. So we've had a fair few people. Now, what I would say is that for those that aren't aware of me, I became known within the UFO field in 2002 when I created an unofficial national database for British police officers to report UFO sightings. It wasn't just to report, it was also to collate historical police accounts and search for them through newspaper archives, etc., etc. I started with 6 cases involving 10 officers. They were from well-known cases that were in books. And then basically now we're approaching about 1,100 police officers involved in about 550 to 600 cases. It was very much at the forefront of my research for many years. But when I retired from the police after 24 years in 2013 to launch UFO Truth Magazine, inevitably that went onto the back burner. So I'm not getting as many reports as I got in the past, but they still come in, and only last week a new one came in. So they do come in, but I'm in the process, subject to time, of compiling a book of all these police accounts, which I've been saying this for 3 years, that the book is going to get done. Well, I'm 60% done, but I've had to put it on the back burner because of a number of other projects. And what I would say is hopefully by the end of this year, we'll be there or thereabouts. I think the reality is that when you're an editor of a magazine, they often say it's a curse of an editor that you don't get a book out yourself. Like Graham Birds will never do a book of his own with UFO magazine, and I think it's a common thing. AJ Javado, who runs the Brazilian magazine, printed magazine in Brazil, he's the same, and we kind of like had this private bet who can get the book out there first, because he does a lot of private research with going down the Amazon. Once a year he goes down the Amazon and collects UFO stories from the local villages, tribespeople, and it would make for a great book. So I keep saying to him, get your book out there, and he said, get my book out there, but it has to go onto the back burner at various times as other things come up. The magazine's got to come first, but hopefully by the end of the year that'll be there or thereabouts. And so as a result of creating that database, an unexpected thing happened that I didn't anticipate when I created it. People started to ask me to speak at UFO conferences, which I'd never been to, bar one, when Graham Birdsall had invited me to his conference in Leeds. And so I then, in a sense, started to do lectures, and then found that it actually was something that came relatively easy to me. I was quite a confident speaker and didn't mind crowds, standing in front of crowds. So as time's gone on, I've done more and more, and from 2010 onwards, when I got the Disclosure Award from Steve Bassett, PRG, in Washington in 2010, I've been doing international lectures ever since, as well as obviously domestic ones. So it's very busy. I'm involved in lots of things. I'm currently involved in a new documentary called Capel Green that we can talk about in part later on, which is as a result of Larry Warren passing a polygraph tests, so we can talk about that later. Yeah, but so that's basically my background. Basically, former police officer, former Royal Air Force police officer as well for 6 years, who created a database and then found myself being dragged into a media kind of role.
Well, we've got something in common there, Gary, because if you'd have told me 5-6 years ago, oh, you'll start doing a radio show and you'll do it week in, week out for years, I'd have thought you were just completely daft in the headlight. But somehow I just drifted into it, and I believe you were the second or third interview I ever did on Critical Mass Radio with Paul Giovanni. Do you remember that?
I've done so many. I'm going to be awful and say no, I don't remember.
No, it was probably quite forgettable because I was quite green, wet behind the ears then. But yeah, I always enjoyed talking to you. Now, something I really want to touch on straight away, because there's an awful lot of people who listen to us who are really not that interested in the UFO subject, but only since the last month or so, since December the 18th, I believe it was, it's suddenly been talked about in the mainstream media. I mean, the Pentagon, well, Tom DeLonge is rolling out this To the Stars Academy, and he's got just a board full of spooks.
He did go a bit mad for 2 or 3 days on the internet, well, as compared with what we normally face in the mainstream media. So there was definitely a buzz for several days. Some people thought it was the start of disclosure with a big D. I never thought that would be the case, because for it to be big disclosure, it would have to be on hour in, hour out, 24 hours a day, which it would be if there was like a big terrorist bombing. There'd be wall-to-wall coverage on every channel. Well, we didn't have that, but we did have a major set of information. The significance of the DeLonge material, which was viewed, I think, with quite a lot of suspicion, because a lot of people thought, well, how can this musician have all these links seemingly to intelligence personnel, government personnel? You know, what makes him different? Why would they use him or get involved with him? So I think he was viewed with some genuine suspicion. But I know that Grant Cameron was a supporter and thought it would be genuine. And I think he was proved right, because whilst the actual presentation when Tom DeLonge came out was a bit still up in the air from my point of view when I watched that, the actual what came a few weeks later, i.e. the Pentagon admission, is absolutely hugely significant for, I think, at least 3 reasons. The first reason is that it confirms that in secret the Pentagon admitted to having a 22 million budget for a 5-year 2007 to 2012 secret study on UFOs, for want of a better word. But for me, the most important thing was the second thing to really come out, was where they admitted, and effectively the Pentagon, through their spokesman, was admitting that they'd done the study and that they had to admit that there were, in a sense, exotic objects flying around in the airspace above America that seemed to defy our laws of aviation, aerodynamics, and moved at incredible speeds and maneuverability. Now, that in itself is incredible, because in a sense, if you look at the whole UFO community and history since the 50s, certainly, that's all people have ever said. I saw something strange, and it was zigzagging, making right-angle turns. It was doing this and that, and it shot off at an incredible speed. Well, in effect, they've now admitted that. So all those people that have had so much grief and ridicule have actually, I think, been largely vindicated. Undoubtedly, a lot of them would have been just mistakes, but undoubtedly there'd be a fair proportion of those from the 50s, the 40s, 50s onwards that did see things that are being seen now, because they describe the movements, the blink of an eye, acceleration. It's not a graduated acceleration, it's just a gone in an instant from one side to the horizon to the other side, and it's gone in the blink of an eye. Well, that's the kind of thing that was being reported then and is reported now. So to me, it's a vindication of all those genuine people who saw things all those years ago. And I think finally the other major revelation was the fact that they admitted that also exotic materials had been recovered that were currently being analysed by the Bigelow Corporation in the States. Now, it's hinted at, they weren't that specific, but it kind of hints at that it's, very strange alloys that don't appear to be formed, are not naturally formed on the Earth. So it implies, kind of extraterrestrial, but it was one step short of saying it's ET. And of course, then significantly, they released the 2 video clips, and in the main, the main focus was the Nimitz incident in 2004 with the pilots chasing a number of objects, although we only see one, but they mention others, a group of others. So, and we also know that I think that clip was 5 minutes long, and they only released a minute of it. So it'd be nice if they released the other 4. But it was an exceptionally important admission, because obviously if they're doing a secret program, how many years it took, it was in secret to most members of Congress and the Senate, which is wrong. The president clearly never knew about it when Obama was in power, or if he did, he lied because he didn't say anything about it. And 2, it actually contradicted everything the Americans had ever said since they closed Project Blue Book in '69 with the Condon Committee that said there was nothing to it. Now, UFO researchers who know what's what have always known that was a lie. But to the general public, this has never been admitted. Well, in a sense, that's what they were admitting. That for all the years they've been saying, we're not interested, after the closure of Project Blue Book, here we go, there's a secret study going on, and hey, guess what? They're actually real. These things, whatever they are flying around. So it was a big deal.
Something that struck me about this, Gary, and I'm not sure whether I'm maybe going off on a bit of a tangent, but I'm a bit concerned with the way this is being presented. It's almost like they're trying to rewrite history. It's as if, oh, yeah, you got disclosure on the 18th of December 2017, and nothing really happened before then, because there was no mention of Blue Book, any previous happenings, incidents, sightings, none of that. Clearly, the American military were engaging with these objects over many decades before that.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they're trying to write that bit out of history. I don't know whether that's some sort of defense mechanism, because they don't want to be hung by the neck for treason for basically stealing from the American public for all these years and lying through the teeth about it.
Well, what was clear over those 3 or 4 days of frequent TV media interviews, especially in the States, was if you watch virtually every one of them, and I don't think I've actually seen what I would call a proper investigative series of questions during these interviews with the people involved, it was obvious to me that whilst the presenter was doing the interview, they were taking it seriously, and they did appear to be interested, and it was not with their usual bit of fun. However, what they didn't do, and I think this was absolutely deliberate in every interview, is they didn't ask the logical follow-up questions. Right, so what you're basically saying is that you had a secret program. Okay, so you're admitting now that you lied since 1969. They never asked that question. They didn't go down that line. So you're saying that you've admitting that these things are flying around. They seem to be far in advance of our technology. In America, supposedly the leading nation in the earth, biggest nation in the earth with technology, but they're far superior. They didn't ask the logical question is, well, if they're not ours, where do they come from? And it's as if every single producer was speaking into the earpiece of the reporter, do not ask that logical next question. Do not ask that logical question. And you watch all of them, and they don't. Because that should have been the logical question. It's not actually good enough to say, well, yeah, these things are flying around. And then the interview just goes, oh, okay then. So how much was the budget? You know, change the subject, going off in a different direction. They just let them off the hook every time. So that, and I also see that there is possibly a danger, and as some people have speculated for a few years now, that the main thing that the Americans might try to do after terrorism, being the buzzword for the last 5-10 years at least, and so it's into everybody's consciousness, is that they might try to put the fear of God of everybody, that there's an alien invasion imminent kind of thing, and try to demonize, not in the satanic way, but, you know, kind of like make people frightened that if these things are out there, we're going to protect you, and that's why we've not been telling you the truth for all these years, which is actually one possible and genuine reason why they haven't. But I think they may try to exploit this partial admission and try to say, well, we're not mentioning too much because it's pretty scary, the implications, and yet most researchers worth their salt will know that these things have been real, that their maneuverability, there have been far too many pilots, military pilots who've chased them in broad daylight. I've met several of them. I met a guy called Colonel Oscar Santa Maria at the citizens' hearings in 2013 in Washington, D.C., and he gave testimony from when he was a military pilot in the Peruvian Air Force, and he basically had the whole of the panel, which was one former senator and 5 former congressmen and women, their jaws were on the floor when he gave his testimony, because he basically said in broad daylight he was sent up to a radar-confirmed UFO in Peru, over Peru, and he was told to fire his weapons at it, his machine guns, which he did. Nothing happened, apart from the object suddenly went vertical at 10,000 feet in 3 seconds, stopped, so he had to put on his afterburners to try to get up to it again, and then it was like playing with him. It then jumped another 10,000 feet, 3 seconds, another 10,000 feet, until it was really beyond his height ceiling. So it was absolutely ridiculous, and that was in broad daylight. But most people don't get to hear that. But when the people on that panel heard that, their jaws were on the floor. And I kind of wish that the skeptics of this world would actually address these excellent cases that defy total explanation and say, what was that? And no, they never do. They talk in generalizations.
Absolutely, Gary. And just going back to you saying about the journalists not asking the logical follow-up questions, to me, something which was set alarm bells ringing slightly was the 2 main journalists that are front and centre in this are George Knapp, who effectively brought John Lear and Area 51 to the public attention, and also Leslie Keane, who was married for I don't know how many years to Bud Hopkins. I don't
think they were married.
I thought they were. Sorry, they were partners then. If they
were partners, I don't think they were married. I did meet Leslie and Bud Hopkins when they came over. I think it was 2006 for the Truro conference, and I was speaking there as well, and I had great pleasure in meeting them then.
Yeah, you see, Bud was one of the leading pioneering researchers on contactees, abductions, and yet neither of them mention ETs or aliens or ask about them. It's almost as if they've been told, whatever you do, you must not mention ET.
It is a bit of a strange one for Leslie Keane, because obviously when Bud died, up until that point, she was his partner, and and had gone around with him for several years. She is a very good journalist in her own right, and but I think the difference is that when Bud died, because she was, in a sense, a mainstream journalist, when she focused her attention on UFOs, and she wrote a great book, UFOs, Generals, Colonels, etc., she did it from credible things, i.e. the pilots, and hence the title of the book. And I think that she didn't really let her public know that she'd had this long association with an abduction expert, Bud Hopkins, because I think she probably feared that it would damage what she was trying to do, which is like, let's concentrate on the high caliber witnesses, the pilots, military, commercial, government, officials, senior military figures who'd had experiences, etc. So I think that was probably done quite deliberate, but it's funny that she doesn't talk about it much now, despite all those years with Bud.
Yeah, and also something that was mentioned very briefly in the New York Times article, which not many people seem to touch on, apart from Grant Cameron, is they've also said that the Advanced Aerial Threat Investigation, whatever it is, they are also working very closely with experiencers. So that to me tells me that Grant Cameron saying that consciousness is a really big part of this. We're all looking at nuts and bolts when we should be looking more towards the consciousness side of it. That says to me that the US government are well aware of that.
Well, I think I wouldn't say the US government, the US intelligence services and one or two very high up officials in government will know. But not many. I don't think most senators, I don't think most congressmen and women have a clue, because they're just not briefed, and they've been led a merry dance for years as well. Obviously, one or two will be in the know, But if presidents don't even get told the truth, what hope is there for a senator or congressman and woman? So that doesn't surprise me. No different from saying that if you asked every member of parliament, I would think that you'd be lucky if you got 5 out of all the 630 odd MPs who have really any clue about the subject, because there wouldn't be need to know, and they're not privy to it, because it is way above everything else, because in a sense you are talking about the most important thing in the development of mankind, i.e. confirmed contact. So I don't think it's something that many people really know about. But undoubtedly a few will, and I think most of it is known with certain big corporations, billionaires who've got power and influence, and it's well known within the intelligence services, especially in America. So I think that's where the real knowledge is. But what I always say to people at lectures is, we are probably maybe only know 10% of what's in the public domain, which means there's a hell of a lot we don't know in the secret world of intelligence services and governments. And so, if we only know 10%, what we know in that 10% is already enough to create a circumstantial evidence case to say that ET is real and is interacting with humans now. But Christ, who knows what the secret world knows? Well, people speculate about that there's treaties and all that. I never go down that road because there's not enough evidence to corroborate it. But it may well be secret space program. It may well be we have got secret colonies here or there. It wouldn't surprise me, but I don't go near it at this stage because there aren't enough people with checked out and confirmed backgrounds to support it, to corroborate it.
Going back to that, the whole consciousness thing that Andy was talking about before, I mean, that would explain if this is all being kept away from us by governments and things like that, that would explain the attack on consciousness and the attack on people's culture and the attack on people's language and the attack on generally, you're mentally attacked everywhere you go, whether it's you're watching TV or even like, you know, you're surfing the internet and you're probably on a site, but you're still being attacked. And you're still being given these messages. So that to me would if they were trying to hide an ET presence, I think that there's I think that the consciousness thing should be explored, because it is something that we've had taken away as a race.
Well, yes, no, I kind of agree with you. I certainly think that many years ago, when UFOs first came out, it was very much the Major Donald Kehoe would say, "This is nuts and bolts, and it's spaceships and whatever." And I think that was right for the time, and he would say that this is real. And Kehoe is a big hero of mine, and I believe that. But that's a proportion of cases. But I think after 70 odd years, we know a lot more than we did in the 50s, obviously. And I think what has to be accepted with the way science has developed is that we now know that with the God particle, there might be 12, 14 different dimensions. And so this is something that wasn't known in the 50s. So we have to accept now that there may well be multiple verses, multiple universes, interdimensional. All of these things could account for why certain things happen in certain sightings. And what comes with that as well in the modern era of ufology is consciousness being at the key. And what I mean by consciousness is that maybe the power to travel can be instantaneous through the power of the mind, if you know how to tap in to that level of consciousness. I can't, but some people say they can.
And of course, you might need a little bit of technology to help you tap into that consciousness as well, might you? So the two are not exclusively...
It's not impossible.
Yeah.
It's not impossible now. I don't think we can rule out anything. From my point of view, as a former police officer, and the direction I come at this subject is, I still think there's enough nuts and bolts there where pilots are chasing what look like metallic objects to say that at least one aspect of this phenomena does involve physical objects, or which appear to be physical, tangible objects moving in the airspace. That's my particular bit that I research and fascinate me, because that's, in a sense, in our material world, the things that you can hold on to, a piece of machinery, a radar data, as if something is physical. When you start talking about interdimensional, multiple universes, etc., it then goes into a more philosophical thing that's much harder to prove, and I think is hard for a lot of ordinary people to grasp. Yeah, and there is so much disinformation and BS with this subject over so many years of ridicule that, from my point of view, I just try to show the best high caliber witness cases, because I think that is something you can say, well, if 1,000 police officers have seen something, they can't all be wrong. If there's 5,000 pilots, they can't all be wrong. It gives people can accept that much easier than talking about abduction, contactees, greys, mantids, large, tall greys, the Nordics. That will lose a lot of people because it's too big a leap unless they are very familiar with the subject.
Andy, you've done the old microphone muted thing again.
Oh, yes. Well done. Thanks, Jason.
No problem.
Yeah,
it's nice to be back.
Yeah, it's always good to be back. There's something as well about that. I mean, there are a lot of people out there telling us stories of contact, but I'm finding increasingly over the last probably 7 or 8 years, we've got some outrageous stories coming from whistleblowers who are supposedly in the secret space program, who no way Jose, can you check their story? So they just put any kind of, well, it looks to be garbage.
I think who you may be referring to is the likes of Corey Good. Now, yeah. I've never met the guy. He might be a nice guy. But if somebody says, well, I was on a secret space program on Mars, and unless he can produce a hell of a lot of corroborated material, I would go, that's a big leap. But where I was shocked, I was absolutely shocked to find him talking at a MUFON major conference. And I'm thinking, you're making a big leap of faith here, MUFON. And that's not to say that it doesn't exist, but to have him on as if and just accept what he's saying or appear to accept and give him that platform of legitimacy, I think he's a bit dangerous.
Yeah. It's almost like some of it looks like it's been put out there to discredit the more serious researchers, if you like, to me anyway.
Well, we certainly know that the CIA, the NSA, those kind of people are disinformation experts. So that wouldn't surprise me. But by the same token, I wouldn't be surprised if we did have a NASA secret space program, because it doesn't make sense that we've not been back to the moon since, was it 1972? It's ridiculous. There's no excuse. We can get there faster, quicker, better technology. So we should be doing that every year, like the shuttle. You know, it's ridiculous that we've not been back. So there must be a reason why we've not been back, and it may well be something happened, as a lot of people suspect during those missions. A lot of people speculate that they did see UFOs. Neil Armstrong made several private remarks confirming he'd seen UFOs. There's all various bits and pieces, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is, it doesn't make sense not to have gone back. It's ridiculous. And we were as a kid growing up, we were supposed to go into the Mars in the mid-80s. And here we are, and we haven't gone anywhere. We haven't been back to the been back to the moon. It just does not make sense that all we get is the space shuttle and the ISS. And there's still a lot of speculation whether you can get through the Van Allen radiation belts. There's the mistakes that are made by the NASA employees who say, oh, we can't get through the runner, which means we never went to the moon. So there's all these conflicting things, but there may well be a secret space program, and that's maybe why we haven't been back, at least publicly. But I think it's a dangerous thing to let people have legitimacy on big platforms without really kind of checking them out. And I don't think there's enough material there that I would never have Corey Good at the conference that I organised, because it's just too big a leap and not enough corroboration.
Yeah, we've just got an excellent quote pasted in the chat room here from Paul Webster, and he's put, Donald Pettit at NASA stated, they used to have the technology to go to the moon, but we lost it, and it's too painful an experience to recreate it. What the hell's all that about?
No idea, but it's ridiculous.
Yes. Yeah, but it's like, oh, yeah, we invented this thing that is the most cutting-edge technology ever in the history of humankind, or so we're told, but we forgot the recipe.
Well, I don't think anybody believes that for a moment, do they?
It's like a 40-year-old man, a 50-year-old man saying, I used to be able to tie my shoes, but I can't now. But I've forgotten.
Yeah, it's a bit like saying, yeah, we used to do heart transplants, but I can't remember how to do it now. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody believes that. It is twaddle. It is twaddle. There is no excuse. And yet we are, because technology is progressing, and I've been saying this for many years now, we are edging towards big disclosure, but as I've always said, it won't come from the UFO world, although I'd like it to be, but I don't think we're powerful enough. I think it will come from the mainstream when they get a confirmed radio telescope signal, which they've said will happen by 2033. Well, we're getting towards that now, so, it's only another few years and we'll have that. So it is coming, and the point I've always tried to say is that whenever that contact is officially acknowledged, the world needs to be prepared a lot more than it is now. And what I mean by that is, If a civilization picks up on a TV signal and then suddenly contacts us, and in 2030, just 12 years from now, they go, "Hey, yeah, we got your message. We're X billions of miles away on the far side of this galaxy, whatever. But thank you. We've been watching you for a while. Nice to see that you've joined the Cosmic Club. We'll see you next week."
Yeah.
That's a real possibility. For us, it's impossible. But for them, if they're a million years ahead, with a million years ahead of propulsion development, they could say, "I'll see you next week." And if we have not started to prepare the general public that ET is real and it's going to happen sooner rather than later, that's when you can get real panic. And in my opinion, what they should be doing now, especially in light of the recent Pentagon admissions, is begin to go back to the drawing board. All the TV companies that have poo-pooed this, all the mainstream that have been ridiculing it for all these years, should be going back and say, the implications of these admissions from the Pentagon are quite profound. We need to start readdressing the way we have looked at this subject. We, as the mainstream, have clearly been told lies, and it's now time to start believing these people and start to retell the whole history of the last part of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century in light of what we know now.
Yeah, but you just touched on SETI there, Gary. Now, just my simple lorry driver come accidental radio presenter's brain, I'm thinking, well, we know that quantum entanglement, if you get two particles that are entangled in a quantum way, you can move one to the other end of the universe and the two communicate instantaneously. There is no time delay. So therefore, if these civilizations are only 100 or 1,000 years, never mind a million years more advanced than us, then I would say there's a strong likelihood that they won't be communicating using radio waves.
Oh, absolutely, but it's also just the people. You know, this is where mainstream science and astronomers, for all their cleverness, are stuck in a very narrow band of what is acceptable to them, which I guess is science, the way it works, and you've got to be able to prove it, and demonstrate it, and reprove the experiment kind of thing. It's a lot difficult to do this, but they cannot seem to get their head around that if a society, an alien civilization, was just 500 years ahead of us, that they would be using way in advance propulsion systems that we are. I mean, it's like saying, look how far we have moved in technological terms just within the last 100 years. I don't care who you are, not one of us can envisage what it would be like in 400 to 500 years' time. Who could have, if you went and gave an iPad to Leonardo da Vinci, the greatest mind of probably the previous 400 years, he wouldn't have a clue how that worked, despite his genius, because the leap was so far. And yet that's only a few hundred years. And so, you know, if just 500 years, we cannot even envisage anything of what, who could have envisaged that in 1969 we went to the moon? Let's assume that we did, and I'd like to think we did. We went to the moon, and the power of the actual Apollo 11 craft was, I think, under 1 megabyte of actual data at that time. 1 megabyte of data ran the whole thing. Absolutely incredible. We can't even comprehend that now because we've gone so far. Who could have imagined that just within the space of 20 years mobile phones would move to a smartphone technology that makes it the most indispensable tool there is in the world, and revolutionise computers? There are superb mini computers so far in advance. Nobody could have envisaged that just in 20 to 30 years.
And
it's a ludicrous argument.
We're supposed to believe that these computers that have that are now supercomputers. There's huge, massive servers that are these supercomputers that can do all sorts of things that would blow your mind. But even with those, they can't replicate what a bunch of blokes did with slide rules and and pencils and protractors and all that sort of guff back in the late 60s, right at the very end of the 60s.
It's absolutely nonsensical what they're trying to say. There is, I don't care whether you believe in UFOs or not, there is no logical good argument to explain why we've not been to the moon since 1972.
Well, and NASA's official explanation, I think, is the public got bored with it, so the funding dried up.
I don't believe that for a moment.
No, it doesn't make any sense at all.
And I think that the public would be absolutely, if there was a moon mission put together to go next year, people would be so excited to be following that. It would be, because I think a lot of people are genuinely curious and think, did we go, did we not go? I obviously want to believe that we did go. I do think we went. Where I struggle to accept is that I don't think, personally, any of the footage that was ever broadcast from space and of the moon is real. I personally don't think any of the footage is real. I do believe we went.
Yeah, well,
I think that was done purely to win the space race with the Soviet Union.
There was a lot of disinformation put out there. It's come out in the last couple of years that Gagarin never even went into Earth orbit, did he?
I've not heard that.
Oh, right, yeah.
Well, Gagarin wasn't the first man in space anyway. That was...
No, I think a few died. I think there's a few people died in their first few...
They were...
Vladimir Ilyushin, wasn't it?
Ilyushin, yeah. Vladimir Ilyushin. He, apparently the story goes that he got into space, but then he crash-landed. He got into space, I think, did one orbit of the Earth, and then crash-landed in China. And Russia and China at that time were enemies, really, and because he'd crashed in China, they had him in hospital, obviously, and kept him for a bit, and the Russians didn't want to admit that this had happened, so Vladimir Ilyushin was the first man in space, apparently the first man in space, and never got given the accolade.
Well, I can well believe it, because that was the power of of what was the Cold War. And don't forget that America had pretty much been losing the space race up until that point. Sputnik had gone out first, which was Soviet. They put the first dog in space and all that kind of stuff. Gagarin was accredited as being the first one to step out in space. So I think to me it makes perfect sense that they would do whatever it took if they could get away with it to win the space race. And therefore the footage was recreated. I think Capricorn 1, in terms of the footage recreation, is probably quite close to the truth.
Yeah, it's not a film I've seen.
Oh, you see, it's one best that they go to Mars, and it's all done in a studio, and the world is conned, and it's a very good film. It's about late 1970s, I think it would be, but it's you should get it. Look, you can find it. Capricorn 1. It's a very good film, and I think it makes perfect sense. But I do think that we went. But every time I look at the orbiting of the moon, it just doesn't look real. There are so many anomalies that have been picked up by experts, photographic experts, and about when they're supposedly halfway to the moon through one of the windows. There's actually a picture stuck to the window to make it look like they're looking back at the Earth, a proportionate size. A lot of, there's some genuinely good anomalies that aren't just crazy people. There are some very clever people, far cleverer than me, who are experts in their field, who'll say, that's not right, the shadows are not right, blah, blah, blah. And I can believe all that. But I do think that we went, but I don't think that there is any legitimate reason why we've never been back. And there has to be then a reason why we've not gone back. And I think that's something probably to do with either what they found there or what they saw there.
Yeah. Well, we've almost got to the end of the first hour, Gary. I know we need to talk in the second hour about the upcoming documentary Capel Green, because I had a little hint that it was coming up a while back last year, but I was sworn to secrecy, so I kept my word and kept very quiet about it. Yeah. So I'd like to hear as much as possible, and obviously we want to hear what you've got lined up for the conferences this year. So, Jason, have you got a tune lined up for the comfort break?
I certainly have. You're listening to Raconteurs News. It's Gary Heseltine with us this evening with myself and Andy. We'll be back after a couple of records. This one's The Electric South featuring Bob Lind, and it's called Sing.
love to sing, and I sometimes wonder why not let go.
Hello, this is Heath Dweft, and I listen to
Raconteurs News. And welcome back to Raconteurs News this Monday night. Monday night, it's the 22nd. We used to call this Raconteurs 2 when Adi did it. Remember that? All them times back when Adi was here reminding you that the world was for everybody and not just the chosen few. Hopefully we'll get him back on a couple of shows. I know he's not really... I don't think presenting and having a deadline, having a set time really suited him very well. So we'll get him back on at some point. And good luck with whatever you're doing, Adi. Well, I know what you're doing. You're doing your job. Yes, on another couple of things I wanted to mention there, we played Kevin Little versus Madonna and Sing by the Electric South. That's off an album. I think it's called Anthems 2005, Club Anthems. I love that song. I used to play it constantly at the end of the night or when I was working DJing all those years ago, and people always used to come up and say, "Oh, what's this song? I've never heard it before." And so that's the Electric South featuring Bob Lind, and it's off the album. I've tried to get the version, but it's the only version is on the album Anthems 2005 or something like that. So it's a white sleeve, and Heath. Who then just said to us that, he listens to Raconteurs News. Well, he'll be doing more than that tomorrow night. He'll be here in the studio with me. It's one of his... it's going to be one of his flying visits. He stops over for a night, and we enjoy ourselves. We get refreshed, and we like to put lots of herbs on our food and things like that. So it should be a good show. And we've got Carl Davis on as well, the guy that was on last week. But remember, he had to rush off to go and collect his daughter, who had just had an operation. So Carl Davis will be on, and Heath will be in the studio with me. I don't know how much you're going to hear from him, but he will be here in the studio with me tomorrow night. So there'll probably be a bit of farting about going on as well. But I don't suppose Carl will be bothered about that. He's a pretty sweet dude. Okay, so let's get back to this evening. Andy, welcome back.
Hey, mate. Yeah, I love the songs. I just prefer Heath more.
Yeah, I know, but I thought I don't want us to Heath out on anything. I don't want to get Heath out. I don't want to Heath everybody out. I do understand. I love listening to his songs. I have them when I used to be driving about in my van. I used to have them on my a little memory stick, and I'd be listening to them and going down road, driving down road. So I love his songs, but I just don't want to over Heath the pudding, if you know what I mean. So I just thought I'd stick a couple in there. We'll take them out of the YouTube version and. Or the podcast or whatever, but yes. Anyway, Andy, you were and Gary. How you doing, Gary? All right. Was that a good break for you?
Yes, welcome break. Thank you.
Brilliant. Right. Okay. Well, what I think I'm going to do is, because you and Gary were talking in the break and you were sort of discussing what direction you wanted to take this, I think I'll just hand it over to you, Andy.
Well, Gary's the guest, and people come to listen to our guests, not just me and you prattling on, although they do seem to enjoy it when it's just me and you prattling on occasionally. So, Gary, the floor is yours. Where do you want to start for the second half, mate?
Perhaps we should talk about the recent video that I put out, the short 30-second clip that I put out. After great deliberation, I decided to put it out with Colonel Holt and I walking through the woods. I think there's a few misconceptions knocking around there, so it's perhaps as well to address them. I did put something out to clarify. Some people thought that maybe that it was a secret recording and that was a bit naughty. It wasn't secret at all. My wife and I were at Rendlesham because an independent producer had brought in a number of people, including Nick Poe and a number of others, for a documentary that he hoped to make and then sell to mainstream. Alas, it never happened. But he'd already put us up in the hotels, as it were. And we had a morning free when I wasn't required and Colonel Holt wasn't required. So I said to Colonel Holt, have you ever done a walk around of the forest since the incident and gone all around and tried to retrace your steps as per your 18-minute audio tape, and he said no. So I said, shall we do that? And the weather wasn't bad, as you can see on the video clip if you're familiar with it. And so we headed out, and my wife, Lynn, had an iPhone, and he was more than agreeable for her to be taking intermittent clips. She was walking just a few feet behind us, and to be fair, my wife Lynn is not a photographer, so this is very much handheld, shaky all the time. It's not great footage apart from when we stop, and then it's obviously better. But as you've got bouncing footage all over the places where she's walking a few steps behind. But this was all said and done with the agreement with Colonel Holt. Now, you've got to put this into the context. This was in late, I think, November 2010. And at that stage, I was almost 3 years into a collaboration period with Colonel Holt, where I was writing a script and then submitting it to him for alterations, changes that he might want to make, etc., etc. So I wrote the script. So anyway, it was during that collaboration period. So why wouldn't he be happy? We got on very well at that time. So there's no hint of any secrecy there. But that said, let me tell you the story of how this has come about and how that clip came about.
Yeah.
My wife must have taken around 13, 14 little clips, minute here, 2 minutes there, some a little bit longer, some a little bit shorter. All in all, probably about 14 minutes in total. And for a while, I contemplated the idea of putting them all together for a documentary. However, because they were so shaky, because it was all handheld, I ultimately didn't think that the quality was there, and had sort of put them to one side and never done anything with them. I'd obviously watched them at the time or shortly after, but had kind of forgot what was in them, or perhaps the significance of what was in them, because to me this was just another day. But it was, but I'd obviously kept them and put in a file. Well, obviously, with the development of Capel Green, which is to do with Larry Warren passing a polygraph, we'll talk about that later, I obviously started to revisit anything I had in terms of research with Rendlesham Forest. So I come across this folder with all the little clips in, and I started to play them. And then, and this was probably about 2 months ago, and then as I was listening to this particular clip, I suddenly heard this conversation that basically says, there was lost time on the first night. This is Holt speaking. There were lost time on the first night, and they were unaccounted for hours. And I thought, wow, has that come out since in the public domain? As he said that since he wrote the book Holt Perspective, I think, which came out in 2015. And I looked, and as far as I could see, he'd not mentioned that. So what I did do by way of qualification on that is I private messaged John Burroughs, who I'm in contact with, and said, has Holt ever contacted you or told you that he was confirming that you were unaccounted for 4 hours on the first night of the 3-night incident? And he said no. And I said, well, I've actually come across this clip, and as I listened to it, that's exactly what he's saying. And he said to me, are you going to put it out on private message? So I said, yes, at some point. But then it was coming up to Christmas, various bits. Magazine goes out at the end of December, so December's pretty much busy for me. So anyway, I thought, well, I'll wait until the new year. Obviously, Christmas comes and goes. We're into the new year. I then decide to release just a 30-minute segment, because there's no point releasing it with it's all over the place. I took the best bit out and the most pertinent bit. So I edited that bit out, which created a 30-second segment, which I then released to a journalist friend, who then put it out to the papers to see if anybody would pick it up. And sure enough, the Sun picked it up and made a disastrous job of it, getting a lot of it wrong. But essentially, they put the video out, which is the main thing. And then I think the Daily Mail put it out. They were much more accurate what was in there. So anyway, the story got out. Now, as I've said on a couple of radio shows since, even though it was said and all done and there was no hint of secret film or whatever, to release the clip, it still did create some personal dilemma for me, because the sad thing is that I ended my association with Colonel Holt in 2015 after, or late 2014 really, because he made 2 lectures, public lectures, where he slandered Larry Warren, who we'd always had a downer on ever since I knew him, and I'd met him in December of 2007. He'd always had a downer, but he then had made it clear to me that he'd got a new source of information. Didn't tell me who the source was, but he said this new source has got the whole evidence on Larry Warren, and this is going to effectively put it to bed once and for all. He wasn't there. He's a liar, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, if you've got the evidence and you're going to make it public, or you're going to talk about that as the evidence and effectively slag him off, you need to put the evidence out there that matches that to corroborate what you're saying. And the first time he did it, he didn't. And I said, it's unprofessional if you do not put out the evidence at the time you're saying this, because it's just slanderous. Otherwise, it's unsubstantiated allegations. And I said to him, as I say to all people, let the evidence fall where it falls. I had no axe to grind with Larry. I was not a big person close to Larry when this started to happen. And so if there'd have been damning evidence on him that was a conviction or something like that, then it would have been a done deal in terms of certain areas. But what he was saying was unsubstantiated, and he was just telling me he got this source that was really knew everything, and it was going to effectively destroy Warren once and for all. And I thought that was unprofessional to do it. And he did it a second time when he came over to England, I think in summer 2015, and repeated, and to demonstrate that the relationship had ended by late 2014, is ordinarily when he had come over in 2015, I would have normally gone to a conference and it would have been an opportunity to see him since 2010. But I didn't go because I knew that, or I suspected that he was going to repeat the same allegations. And sure enough, he did. And again, didn't produce any evidence. What happened from there is, we'll talk about a campaign to discredit later on, but in the context of this video, is that's the kind of scenario that I'd ended my association. I'd kind of knew that he was writing a book with John Hanson called The Whole Perspective. I waited for that book to come out and obviously looked forward to reading what he said. And it, in the end, it didn't cover any of the things that I thought it should cover that he'd admitted to me. Which creates a dilemma. If you've been told one thing, and by this person, you hold in high regard. I still have high regard for him because he's a colonel, and not many colonels go on the record. But essentially, he didn't come out with things that he said with me, and indeed, in certain areas, came out with things, either didn't mention them or came out with a totally different account, which again left me feeling, well, that's not quite right. Can both accounts be right? Well, the obvious answer is no. You can't have one account and then in the next breath you're saying something else. So anyway, with regards to this latest clip that I came across as we were about the first night and Penistone and Borough's been unaccounted for hours, I thought, well, I've got this. This is clear as a bell. I put a transcript with it so people would not be confused. And put it out to the papers like that to see whether they pick it up. But for me, I wrestled with it in my mind because of my relationship at Holt had broken down. Then he clearly, if I said to him, can I release this? He'd almost certainly say no. Yeah. But in no way was it secret or anything like that at the time. And you can't do it retrospectively, go back. That's ridiculous. So I then had to decide whether to put it out. Was it in the public interest? Well, there has been a lot of conjecture over the years to suspect, and I know that John and Jim both suspect that they'd been abducted or had some missing time. And I knew that they had lots of questions themselves. And I know that they'd both gone down the hypnosis route, but I don't hold that much store by the hypnosis. It's interesting, but it's anecdotal. It doesn't actually prove it in a court of law, as it were. But it is interesting. But anyway, I basically thought, well, here I have. I've got the deputy base commander, as he was then, of a nuclear strike base, and it was a nuclear base because I worked on 2 nuclear bases doing an identical job. So let's not be in doubt that it's nuclear. Of a nuclear strike base saying on camera that there were missing and unaccounted for 4 hours, something which had never been said in the past. It's been rumoured, but never been said in those terms before. So I wrestled with it in my own mind and thought, well, in the end, this is ridiculous. In the end, this is such a famous case. It's arguably the leading case in the world now because of its multiple nights connection kind of thing. It's certainly up there with Roswell, put it there. It's probably in the top 5. And I thought, well, in the public interest, does this move the case forward? And I think it does move the case forward because it opens up something which I'd begun to realise, that as the time with my 7 years with Colonel Holt was, at first he said, I'll tell you everything. But I can tell you on the first night, he said that he got a box of tricks of stuff hidden away for a rainy day if ever he needed it. He never told me what those box of tricks was, and box of tricks is not the term he would use, but he basically said he had other bits of information that he's locked away safely for a rainy day. Quite what that meant, I don't know, but it inferred that he'd got other materials, documents or whatever, if he ever needed to be called upon to use them. And I think that was probably self-preservation at the time because he thought he would never get full colonel, etc. He thought it would affect his career. He never wanted it to come out. So I can see why he would have self-protection with some things, but he never said what they were. Now, when I first started writing the script, I went away for 4 months and said, look, I'll research everything that's out there in the public domain and then come back with you and start asking questions. And so that's what I did. And I believed for a long, long time he was telling me the truth and that he was telling me everything he knew. However, towards the end of our time, I'd also begun to realise that he knew a lot more, but he wasn't telling me it. He never spelled it out that I know a lot more, but it's just something that I sensed. And everything that has gone out since the end of our association kind of proves to me that there are things going on that he was aware of that he certainly didn't tell me, so hinting at other things going on. So in a sense, I thought that with regards to this particular video clip, it's in the public interest, which kind of takes us back to, this is now the 3rd time I've mentioned things about my post-association with Holt. The first time was, I think, 18 months ago when I released another video clip, again that he made for me, but with his knowledge, clearly for me, to camera, when we were at the top of the weapons storage area at Bentwaters, the nuclear weapons storage area. And the reason why, again, I released that is not to be devious, is to progress the case. Why do I want to progress the case? Is because there's so many conflicting things that he has subsequently said in light of his book, The Whole Perspective, which doesn't say the things that he said to me. So, for example, in the clip 18 months ago, where he says it to camera, to me, for me, that he basically says this. He says, yes, I basically say to him, I believe there's other witnesses from that night because of my past experience in the RAF police doing the same job. And he says, yes, there are. And he basically volunteers this information, almost verbatim. He says, yes, I've been contacted by a guy who was in the tower. He contacted me recently, and he told me in no uncertain terms that he saw beams coming down into the weapons storage area, right, which is the nuclear bunker area. And then he actually adds on to it without prompting. He says, and he also told me that the 2 security guys walking around within the weapons storage area also saw the beams too. Well, in effect, that's 3 witnesses that he is saying unequivocally saw beams come down into a nuclear storage area and towards the bunkers. Now, that should be on the front page of every news, of every newspaper, 6 o'clock news. Definite confirmation. Deputy Base Commander is saying this, that witnesses have contacted him. He said that in December 2007. And here we are, almost 11 years later. Okay? That's a long time ago for him to say that. Now, does that turn up with those words in the whole perspective, which is supposedly his definitive account of Rendlesham Forest incident? And the answer was no, they don't appear anywhere. The only section that says is that whilst he's out in the forest, he believes that the beams are coming out at or near the vicinity, but he's not sure. He had told me at the time when we'd first met that he'd changed radio frequency and that the guy in the tower was saying the beams had come down. But the clip that he says is absolutely unequivocal. He says it, he's not prompted, he says it and volunteers the extra 2 on the ground who have never been identified. So there's technically 3 witnesses that have yet to fully come forward into the public domain, and they would be mind-blowing if they did. And if they're out there, I would say for them to contact me at heseltinegary@hotmail.com and say whatever you want to say. It can be in confidence or public, whatever you want, but contact me. Because those witnesses are out there, and we need to start working all together to try to move this forward. And my concern is that if I wait another 11 years, hoping that he's going to say what he actually told me, then I might be dead. Other people might be dead. You know, where do we go? We can't just keep waiting for year and year and year. We can't do it. So in the end, again, that first clip 18 months ago, is it in the public interest? And the answer to me is yes. Does it progress the case? Yes. And it did attract a lot of media attention. Now, he actually denied saying that to me. Well, it's there on video. It's in, it's absolutely crystal clear. If anybody's seen the clip, I can put it up and give you a link to it after the show. But it's there. It's absolutely clear as a bell. It's not me saying it. Now, if he's then saying in his book that didn't happen, then really somebody should be going back to him and saying, well, can you clarify this one way or the other? You can't have both. But he is so clear in that clip, and it's on video. Now, so that was the first time of the 3 times I've quoted stuff from our past association. The second time was, I think, about a year ago, when I decided to release some information that wasn't on video, but was actually said at the same time. As we walked around the forest in November 2010 with my wife doing intermittent clips, we were probably out in the woods and at various locations at Rendlesham for probably 3-4 hours, I'm not sure. And we just kept going around and trying to retrace. We did uncover the creek. We did uncover exactly the field where the beam came down, and it's not what is regarded as the second farmer's field. So we covered all that, and it was really worthwhile. But the point being, on this other clip, on the day I had met Colonel Holt, which was in December 2007, it was for a production of the UFO Hunters program, which was an American series, American crew. I arrived at the hotel. I can't remember what it was. I think it was near Ipswich. And he more or less arrived at the same time. I can hear music. And he basically, we met at the same time. He didn't know me, and I introduced myself, and we ended up, the film crew was still out doing other stuff. So we ended up having a fireside chat, basically, in a nice, it was either in a pub next to the hotel or as part of the hotel. But either way, we ended up having a pub meal or sat by the fire having like a pub lunch kind of thing. But it was in the evening, and I was just throwing questions at him. We got on really well, really nice guy, and a really good rapport. And at the end of that, I'd said to him, "Would you allow me to write a screenplay in collaboration with you?" And he said yes. People had talked about writing books with him, but it had never happened, so he agreed to the screenplay. And so that's how it all started. Then over the next 2 or 3 days we did the filming, hence why we ended up in the weapons storage area tower at one point, which was my suggestion to go up there. Anyway, cutting a long story short, on that first night as we were in the pub, whilst the film crew were all out, he said to me there were more nuclear weapons there than anywhere else in Europe. And in Europe or Britain, I'm not sure because I've got it written down and I don't have the piece of paper to hand, but it was one of the boats that there was more nuclear weapons either in Britain, at that base in Britain or in Europe, right? So he'd said that, and I'd actually gone back and I had a notebook and I wrote it in. I can produce that, and it's written from that date, and it's dated. I did some diagrams of where we walked in the woods based on what he'd said to me. I'd done some drawings of the field and various things he'd said and put a date on it. That's all that can be produced. All right. Now, in a sense, moving forward another 3 years to when this current clip and my wife walking around. Now, as it was, my wife didn't record this clip. But again, here's my reason as to why I decided to do what I do. And what I had was, he said, as we're walking through the woods, but it wasn't caught on film or video, he said a comment that goes along the lines of this. He started to make a joke about the female peace protesters, that if you know your history of a certain age, that a lot of people, a lot of women in particular, formed like a tent village outside RAF Greenham Common, which was leased to the Americans, and it had what was called a weapons storage area, which they called the Glickham. All right, and basically everybody thought that the American cruise missiles, tactical nuclear weapons, were being housed there. Now, she remembered this because of the way he was like Mickey taking about these peace protesting women, because at one point she had considered joining that group. So her ears pricked up, yeah. So it resonated with her, and that she definitely, this is her perception, she heard him say there were more nuclear weapons at Bentwaters than anywhere else in Europe. Anywhere else in Europe. Now, I remembered that because, in a sense, that was the second time he'd said it to me. But because Lynn had heard it, and I said, well, how can you remember? And she told me what resonated with her, i.e. the priest protesters. I'd forgotten all that. But it had resonated on her, and that's what you would call a really good trigger point for her to remember it. It's linked to something. So, to me, that when she remembered it in those terms, it corroborated what I had remembered. So basically, I thought, well, there's two of us saying it. I'm going to put it out now. Why did I want to put it out? Because all these years later, Colonel Waltle still to this day on camera will say, I can neither confirm or deny that there were nuclear weapons at the base. What is that all about? It's a joke. Several of the airmen involved have said that, but various airmen will still say, I can neither confirm or deny. It's ridiculous. It was a nuclear base set up in the 50s. It was a British designed for a nuclear weapon storage. It was no big secret. Yes, the job, you didn't go into talking about your guarded nuclear weapons and the specifics, but it was a nuclear strike base. So let's just put that to one side. So anyway, all these years later, his book comes out after the breakup, and it's not there. There's no mention of this. And I'm thinking, the reason why I want to put this out is because people always come up to me when I do lectures about Rendlesham and say, well, why little old Suffolk? You know, why there? Why were they so interested? Well, to me, that then creates a motive. And now you've got one. At a time of world crisis, and I've said it many, many times, and it makes perfect sense to me. I don't know what it makes sense to other people, but it makes perfect sense to me that at a time of world crisis, i.e. the Polish shipyard workers rising up against the Soviet state, it was still a Soviet state, in 1980, December 1980, at that time, there were hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops massing on the Polish borders. And it looked like they were going to go in to quell the revolution, like they had done in Czechoslovakia, had done in Hungary. It was a Soviet satellite state, so that it looked like they were going to do it again. Now, that's a pretty major thing when you've got mass, you know, you're not far off a World War III, Cold War scenario. So why do UFOs turn up? Because I think that even though it was a nuclear base, that there were more nuclear weapons there that had been stored there that shouldn't have been there, that broke all the armament agreements of the time in terms of numbers. Yeah. And that's why they turned up. And that's why they then shine beams down into the weapons storage area. I think this was a reconnaissance trip, and they were, in a sense, realizing that there was a threat to destabilize the world and that there was something not quite right in terms of, I think they monitor what we do with nuclear weapons, and I think that they turned up there akin to nuclear inspection. So that gives you the motive. And I'm thinking, well, why doesn't this come out? Well, those two comments, the first time he said it, and then my wife remembering the trigger for her to remember and corroborate mine the second time as we walked around, I thought, well, should this go out there? Should we be saying that this is why, it's likely to have happened? And I thought, in the end, again, in the effort to raise public awareness, in the greater public interest of the case, that people should know about this, at least to have the information out there, I decided to put that story out there.
It's
and
clear,
so
Gary,
those are the three things.
It's clear, Gary, that there's obviously everyone's got their own side to every different every story, and that's yours. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to sort of get a little bit away from from where we seem to be not leading, but where we've already explored really, and get on to some more positive things. I want to talk about the conferences that you've got lined up. You've got one in April, haven't you? Because I know that because it's on my birthday, and you've got one in September, the Home Firth one, which I've been to for the last couple of years, and I'll be coming this year because I was the raffle winner for the 3 days. For the ticket for the 3 days, so I
binned your ticket. You're not coming. Only joking. Right, okay. Then let's talk about the Southern Conference. Yes, April the 28th. It's a one-day conference. It's held in Watford. This will be the second time using this venue, which is the Holywell Community Centre in Watford. We used it last year, and it was a really nice venue in a nice area. And it was quite a nice day. And it had a couple of shops nearby, and it was pretty good. Plus, we'd put on a kitchen as well. We do cheap teas and coffees and biscuits and things, that kind of thing, bottles of water. But yes, let's talk about who's coming. Well, the international guest that we're flying in is Grant Cameron. And Grant Cameron is heavily linked with the Tom DeLonge stuff, has been promoting it now for probably over a year. And I do believe I've met Grant many times, and he's a very good researcher, very good speaker, and he's got a brilliant presidential UFO website. But he has developed some very good links, and everything that he has kind of been promoting for the last year, saying that there's going to be some good stuff coming out, obviously bore fruition in December with the Pentagon admission. So I think, and I've spoke to him since then. And he said there's going to be more good stuff coming out. So I'm pretty hopeful that by April there'll be other stuff that we're talking about as well. So he's the principal speaker. There's obviously myself as the host and a speaker. Alan Foster, who is he's a very good lecturer. He often does a different type of lecture to me on UFOs, that he often can do the spiritual side of ufology, and he does it in a lovely way. But he's a long time researcher into crop circles, all manner of things. He's an excellent speaker. So he's from the UK. He'll be speaking. Steve Mary. Me and Steve go back a few years now. He's the editor of Phenomena Magazine. Excellent guy. Phenomena Magazine covers all things, including UFOs. He's more... he obviously has a long time ago his MAPIT, Manchester UFO Connections research group in the past. Then he's obviously gone on to develop Phenomena Magazine, and I think perhaps more so he's more paranormal, much more paranormal focused than me, but an excellent guy, good speaker. I've spoken at the main conference in Home Firth in the past. But what I'm delighted in an unexpected development that will be a bonus for the audience will be about 38 minute interview on video that I did when I went down to London to meet with David Icke, of all people. Now I've kind of followed on and off over the years David Icke's work. Obviously kind of knew the background, from his sports presenting days, and then all the connotations that have been labelled at him as being arguably Britain or the world's leading conspiracy theorist, which is a hell of a title. But I'd never met him, and then because he had a new book out, Everything You Need to Know But We're Never Told. They sent me a copy and said, would you like to review it for the magazine? And I said, okay then, because it has UFO connections with the reptilians, etc., and his belief that they're outside forces. And I said, any chance of doing an actual interview with him, coming to interview him? And they said, yeah, okay then. I went, all right then. I was a bit surprised. And so we quickly arranged to go down and took a film crew down, and we interviewed him in a hotel in London. All I can say, very down-to-earth guy, no airs and graces, and he was kind of one of those people that doesn't appear any different on camera to being off camera, which I liked. And we had a really good conversation, obviously aimed more towards the UFO side of things, because obviously I was hoping to use it for the magazine. And because it went so well, I thought, well, we'll actually keep this back. And we'll air this at the conference. So it's probably 35 minutes to 40 minutes with David Icke. But, I think you will see some questions that I'd not ordinarily asked of him, and some of his replies are really interesting. So I'll leave that for the audience to enjoy, as it were. I'm not going to give that away, what he says.
So
that's Saturday the 28th of April. Tickets are online, all via the magazine website, which is UFOtruthmagazine.co.uk. Just click on what's called the Southern Conference, and it'll take you to all the links for tickets. There's different prices. If you're a subscriber to the magazine, which is an easy, not in print, to UFO Truth Magazine, you get discounts. I do this with all conferences, and so you should get a discount if you're a supporter of the magazine. So what a lot of people never realise is that actually if they were to get a subscription, and when they order a ticket for, say, 3 people and they're a subscriber, that discount is for all 3 is at the discounted price of the subscriber. So you can have the subscriber paying, but essentially his 2 guests will also get it at the subscriber rate, not the non-subscriber rate. So if they did that just once, it pays for a year's subscription on the discount that they've saved on if they've got 2 or 3 or 4 going. Paid for themselves for a year's subscription. But anyway, so that's the first conference, and then of course we hold the big 2-day magazine in Holmfirth, which is a lovely town famous for Last of the Summer Wine, set in the West Yorkshire Hills. Really pretty spot in the Holme Valley, and it's now going to be, in September it will be our 6th international conference, and we started off in a small room of just 85 people, and now, the most we had was when we were at the Picture Dome, which is the other large venue, which is a music venue, when we had Travis Walton, and I think we had 640 people over 2 days. Mm-hmm. But we only used that once because I'd always done it at the Holmfirth Civic Theatre, and I got involved as the vice chairman of the Civic Hall, not Civic Theatre, Civic Hall, because it looked like it was going to close. That's why we went to the Picture Dome. So for 1 year we couldn't use it, but the rest of the time it's at the Civic Hall, which has a capacity of about 280 per day. So it limits it, but for those people who aren't aware of Holmfirth as a town, it's a beautiful place, and I think, Andy, both of you are familiar with Holmfirth. What a great venue it is, because there's all pubs, shops, little antique shops, quaint little shops in a really small area right next to the venue. You literally can't go 5 minutes without bumping into a cafe shop or a restaurant, and so we tend to take over the town now. When I first started handing out flyers to the shops and the cafes, so you've got UFO conference coming up, they just look at me like I was a bit crazy, as they do. But now they love it, because all the bed and breakfasts, residential places, guest houses, hotels, they all fill up. And everybody turns up from literally Thursday night onwards, and then they go back on either Monday or Tuesday. And so for certainly Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there's a real buzz of the UFO community around the town. Do you agree with that, Andy?
Absolutely. I mean, we've been coming. We missed the first Home Firth conference because we didn't hear that it was on. But as soon as we realised that the second one was going to be held, we booked for it. We booked a little bit late and ended up staying 5 miles out of town. But ever since then, I think we're probably one of the first to book every year because we know you've got to get in early if you want to get accommodation in the town centre.
Oh, absolutely.
It's our annual holiday every year. I mean, we're not...
You sad people, annual holiday.
Well, we're not in a position to travel as much as we'd perhaps like to, but we do try and make a point of getting to Home Firth every year because it's just a fantastic crowd. And also, a lot of conferences, the speakers turn up, they go on stage, and they're gone. You don't always get a chance to socialise with them. But in Home Firth, they're all staying in the one place in the centre of town, and we all go there in the evening, and they usually sit down, have their dinner there, and have a chat with anybody who wants to. And I think that's a really fabulous part of it. And the social side of it is equally as important to me and my other half as the lectures.
Yeah, but, one of the comment that we always get great feedback after the conferences, but because we always stay and house the speakers at the Old Bridge Hotel right in the centre of the town, is that outside there, when they redeveloped it, there's a lot of seating area out there. So if the weather's not peeing it down, which I think pretty much we've always done okay so far, you literally have a couple of hundred people out there till 1, 2 in the morning, and they're all UFO-related people, like-minded in little groups, feeling relaxed and not threatened. You get people who would never go to conferences. We probably get a quarter of every conference had never been to a conference, and they go, wow, this is brilliant because we're with like-minded people. So that's the kind of family atmosphere that I have always tried to generate. The feedback seems to be popular. All right, let's look at the people who are appearing this year. Well, we're looking at three overseas speakers. Don Smith, obviously synonymous with his Roswell investigations and other things, but predominantly Roswell. Fantastic case. I'm a big supporter in Roswell. The only thing that I would say then, and again, just harking back to a little bit of the Rendlesham thing, is can we afford to sit on information that we have? Because sooner or later, all the witnesses are going to die, one by one. And we have to try to investigate as much whilst people are still alive. That's my opinion. So we have to progress the case. Obviously, you look at Roswell, a fantastic case. But it will be diminished slightly with younger people now because all the witnesses are dead. Yes, they'll all be aware of it, and it's a great case. But inevitably, over time, 1947, everybody's gone. So, again, we have to try to push stuff forward. Right, so Don Smith. Now, I've done something a little bit different this year, is that I'm a big fan of Ancient Aliens, the concept, not necessarily always Ancient Aliens per TV series, but the Ancient Aliens concept. And it's fascinated me for a long time. And if somebody said we've originated from Mars because Mars got blown up and they needed another planet, it wouldn't surprise me at all if our DNA was adjusted some few hundred thousand years ago and we're all Martians, really. That wouldn't surprise me because it's the missing link that nobody's found. So anyway, I've always had this interest, and I do watch a lot of the stuff put out by the likes of Brian Forster from South America and Andrew Collins in the UK. So they're two guests. So this has got an ancient alien theme to it. And I know that Andrew Collins will be talking about really places that a lot of people aren't aware of that can't really be explained on where this kind of culture, where this links to astronomy come from in all these, very ancient cultures. So that'll be interesting. And Brian Forster, for anybody who goes on to YouTube, he does the Hidden Inca tours, and he's one of the leading people in the world, and he's regularly taking people around to weird and wonderful sites, especially in the likes of Peru and Bolivia. I think he lives in Peru, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, he's coming in, and I'm not even sure he's ever spoken in the UK. He probably has, but he's coming in. Andrew Collins has confirmed, so we've got that link there. And then for those in Europe, there's a guy called Robert Fleischer, and who's really he's probably the only recognised or familiar name from Germany, and he researches cases in Germany. And believe it or not, in Germany there is even more of a blackout on UFOs than there is in this country. But what cases there are, he knows about. And I did a lecture out for him in Leipzig, and Julie invited him back to speak here. He's a very good English speaker. Makes me sick that I can't speak German as good as him. But then we're all lazy with languages, or most of us are. And then, of course, we've got Alan Godfrey. Alan Godfrey, me and Alan go back to 2003 when I started the police database. He's a former police officer and arguably Britain's first confirmed abduction case, or recognised abduction case in history in the UK. I researched his case on and off for about 18 months in 2003, 2004. Wrote a screenplay about his experiences. Really fascinating guy. He hasn't really spoken too much of late, but he was always telling me, I'm going to get a book out there one day. And I said, well, when you do, let me know. Well, sure enough, he finally got his book out early, I think only published a couple of months ago, and about his experience. As I say, a well-respected police officer, had an incredible experience, and I believe him, and something very definitely strange happened to him, which now fits all the classic hallmarks of what we would regard as a classic abduction, i.e. missing time, physical marks, memory problems, jump in time. Very, very weird case, taken on board, being examined by small creatures, putting equipment on his legs, blah, blah, blah. It's a great story, and he hasn't really talked that much for a few years, so it's a real pleasure to have him speak at the conference. We may be looking at one or two other speakers in due time, but that's the lineup as yet. And as you know, Andy, I believe in less is more. I like to give longer times for the speakers. I go around the world and see conferences where people get 50 minutes, which to a lecture is like 10 minutes, honestly. And the audience sometimes will be sat there 3 lectures after lecture after lecture after lecture. Well, that's not realistic. So after every lecture of mine, they're generally 70 minutes minimum, and there's a 20-minute break after each one, and then obviously lunch breaks and whatever. So for me, less is more. So we might be doing 1 or 2 more speakers. It depends on what develops. Maybe so that conference, let me just give you the dates there, is Saturday the 15th and Sunday the 16th September. Where we are with tickets on the Watford conference, that's pretty much half sold, and we've still got 3 months left, so don't be long because they tend to fill up quickly after Christmas. It can only hold up to 180 people, the venue, so I think we're halfway there. So we need to, if you're going to intend to go, book sooner rather than early. All details from the website. If we talk about the September conference, we're probably around the 35% mark of tickets sold, but we've still got another 8 months, so plenty of time, but they tend to fill up now that Christmas is out of the way. So, don't miss out. There will be 2 packed days. They always are. So I think you will really enjoy it. If you've never been to a conference, relax, come, and people really do get a big kick out of it if they've never been to one. because they find that they're sat next to people who think like them, and they're not threatened in any way. Right, so again, tickets from the website, ufotruthmagazine.co.uk. We're finishing at 9, aren't we?
We are finishing at 9, yes.
Right, let's quickly talk about Capel Green then, which is the...
Listen, we can go over a few minutes, it's not a problem.
All right, well, I don't want to say too much, because that's the reason why I have a documentary, is to, in a sense, whet the appetite and get people to go to the documentary. Suffice to say, as I put the public release out saying that Larry Warren, obviously, whom I regard as the first military whistleblower to put his name and face onto camera, is Larry Warren for the Rendlesham Forest case. And it's a documentary about the fact that he's passed a polygraph test. Now, I'm not going to say too much, but what I will say is this. It was a very stringent test with a series of wide-ranging questions. And he passed the test. Now, it will obviously feature in the documentary. What I can say, I'm sure many of your readers have seen the 5-minute trailer. There's 2 trailers out so far. If you haven't, then you just need to go to capelgreen.co.uk. That's the website of the independent company that are doing it. It's an independent documentary team who are putting this together, and I think there's some advantages because it's independent. Because it's independent, i.e. not mainstream, it means they don't have an agenda for mainstream. It means that they can pretty much put together what they want as they want. I am involved, and it will principally tell the story of Larry Warren and his struggle to get recognition for his Capel Green scenario on the 3rd night of activity. Yes, there are problems with the dates, and we're talking about that and recognise all these things, but there's problems with the dates with several people of the witnesses. So, yes, it's not a concise thing, but we pretty much have pretty got a good guesstimate of what the 3 nights of activity are. And on the 3rd night, Larry has his experience, and basically will tell his story of trying to get recognition. And in a sense, what I can say about the polygraph test, and it has already been said, is that the polygraph test was conducted by arguably Britain's top polygraph expert. This is an American woman called Patty Musicaro with her own company, and she's been used by the American police. She's an American Anglophile living in the UK because her husband's English, and she has conducted over 2,000 tests in her career, and she is the top woman. And this is not, there's been a lot of negative comments from certain people, which we'll not go into, trying to say that, anybody can pass a polygraph test. Well, maybe they could a few years ago, but I don't think you could now. And believe me, the series of physical and the apparatus that monitors this, that, and the other, 5 different things, would make most people run a mile. But Larry was very happy to do it, and he passed it. So that will be the premise of the film.
So
the third
basically
night.
What you've done, Gary, is you've made us a film and then told us the end before it's even been released.
Well, that's a good point, but I actually see the opposite. Because Larry Warren is deemed a controversial figure, many people have kind of over the years called for him to do a polygraph test. Mm-hmm. And he has always said, bring it on. And apparently it nearly happened many years ago, but the TV company decided not to in the end. But he has always been open to the idea. And so when this idea came up for making a documentary, I kind of was asked for an opinion, and I said, I think he needs to do a polygraph, and he passed the polygraph. So in a sense, it's because of the way he has been treated over many years, decades, by other witnesses, like said, his opposition within the field, never mind the public. So in a sense, for credibility, he had to take one, in my opinion, and he took one and he passed. So now he should be given, I think, morally a great deal of credit for that, and his account has to be taken seriously. However much it conflicts with people, believe me, this is a very stringent examination, and it should not be dismissed. And I think you have to see the film to tell the story. Inevitably, we'll tell the story of the other nights. But what makes it a little bit more exciting is that if you've seen the 5-minute trailer that was put out on the 37th anniversary on the 28th of December, it's a 5-minute trailer, you can already see from the production values in that, i.e. aerial footage. Where else have we ever seen aerial footage properly of the scene? It's one of the world's most famous cases. No aerial footage. Well, this has got aerial footage in its quality. It's all filmed in 4K. It's going to all the locations. And what I can say is that it's got some tremendous people involved, and it will, I think, bring a whole new element to what is deemed a Rendlesham Forest documentary. So it's something that I think the ordinary person on the street will think is interesting, and it's a human interest story. The guy is controversial, but he's battled all this time, and he's now, I think, has to be great credit for taking the polygraph, passing it, and it's telling that story. And we have to start looking at the Capel Green scenario as real, because he passed it.
Absolutely, Gary. Thanks for that. And I'd like to just say it looks like we've got a few listeners who've saying in the chat room that they'll be coming over to the conference at Holmfirth, and they'll be having a jar with me and Jason in the break sometime. So that's excellent. But it would be remiss of us to let you go without mentioning your support crew, because they really make it a family affair, don't they?
Oh, I say it every year at the conference, obviously on the second day, near to the end, I always give a round of applause to all the people that help me. I am so lucky. Yes, I'm the host, an organizer, but honestly, no conference anywhere would take place anywhere of any size without a team of helpers. Now, I'm lucky that I've got my own family, some good friends, but over the years, several other people who I hadn't known have volunteered to get involved, and they become part of the family. And we probably have about 10 or 11 people over those 2 days, especially the 2 days in Holmfirth, where they work their socks off, and I'm sure that's what you're attesting to. And they do it for me, in a sense, but they do it, they don't get paid. They do it voluntarily. I offer to give them money. I'll put them up in rooms and whatever, but they won't take money for it. They won't take expenses. I basically just put them in a room and say, there's your bed and breakfast and whatever. And they do it because they're interested enough to want to help me, to put on a good show. And believe me, at the start, many of those people were my wife's friends, and they weren't interested in UFOs at all, but they were supportive of me, and because of my association to my wife, they were their friends. They've got involved. I mean, there's a couple called Sue and Jake Gordon who run the kitchen and the teas and coffees, and they work like they're clappers. And honestly, they do it, and they have come to hear the lectures. And one of the things that, if people have not been, that makes my conference different, or largely different, is I don't believe that there should be any vending going on when lectures are on. I think you've paid your money to see the people. What is the point of you being sat outside buying a few books? It strikes me as being disrespectful to the ticket price that you've paid, but also to the speakers. I've been in some conference halls where they've got vending areas outside in different rooms, and you've got half the audience outside buying books and talking to the speakers and doing whatever, and only half the people in the room. So you loses the atmosphere. So, there are some vendors' tables still available for both, I might add, if you want to look on the website. But basically, one of the rules is certainly at both conferences that the vendors' tables are within the actual auditorium where the lectures take place, and no vending takes place I'm like a sergeant major in a nice way, hopefully, Andy. I'm like a sergeant major. I stick to the schedule like a hawk because I've seen so many conferences run away with times. You can't do that, especially when you're hiring places.
Yeah,
So basically, I'm a strict taskmaster in the nicest possible way, and everybody works to it, and they all quickly get the idea, and no vending takes place. So it means if you hire a vendor's table, you see the conferences, which normally doesn't happen. So that's one of my quirks of doing lectures over many years and going around and picking out what works best. And for me, less is more. Lots of breaks, a nice atmosphere outside with lots of venues you can go to, shops, etc. And good, interesting
get into
speakers.
your seat on time, otherwise you are in big trouble.
Well, but that's where it has to be. I mean, I am like the sergeant major, but I explained that at the start. But believe me, everybody comes back afterwards with the feedback and say it works like clockwork, and it has to. I can. There's one example. I won't mention names, but I can remember a lecture taking place at another conference at Leeds just 4 years ago, and a famous American speaker came over and ran over his 2-hour lecture and took it to 4 hours. And people were missing trains, they were missing babysitters, and they had to leave. And it was ridiculous, and I would have strangled him if I'd have been the organiser. I'd have just pulled the plug on him, whoever he was, because that's rude to the organiser and disrespectful to the people that were in the audience. 4 hours for a lecture, that was ridiculous. And it was only supposed to be 2. But there you go. So we live and learn. But that's me about done, and I think I'm going to go get my tea now. I can hear Lynn creating my tea. I haven't had any tea yet, so it's been a pleasure. It always is, and thank you for having me on.
Well, brilliant. And usually we're the ones that end the interviews, not the guests. But you're quite welcome. It's been brilliant, and you've gone over. Thanks for your time. Your 2 hours and 7 minutes. But to be fair, I think I did about 7 minutes on my own in the beginning. So you've only done the contracted 2 hours. So we're not going to be paying your overtime. Andy, anything you want to add before we lose Gary?
Yeah, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Tino, who's set this interview up. Tino does a lot of help for Gary, and he's always the go-to man for the content. Thanks a lot, dude.
Yeah,
I'll
say a special word for Tino. He don't get the recognition. Tino helps run the magazine website, and he runs my Twitter because and the YouTube channel because I'm not a big fan of Twitter, but I think in this day and age you need a Twitter account, so he does that. He helps with the Facebook magazine page, and he's always trying to promote the magazine. So an excellent guy. He's on the door. He's the big burly guy. It looks like he's walked off the set of The Sopranos on the front door at each conference. The big burly guy with the beard. So he does a great job for me, and I'm very lucky to have him helping. Brilliant.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Gary, for joining us this evening on Raconteurs News this Monday night. Oh, poof. Yeah, it's been a great show. It's been a great show, and hopefully we'll have another one tomorrow night. We've got Carl Davis. Remember, it's going to be me and Heath in the studio. Both of us are going to be in the studio, so I'm probably going to have some. The bloke that's normally messaging me throughout the show, he's going to be sat tapping on my shoulder and saying things in my ear while I'm on the show. But we've got he'll be joining me. Hopefully we'll get a couple of words out of him. Not much. I know he won't be doing very much because he's a very shy private man. But Carl Davis will be with us, and he's anything but shy. If you remember, he was the guy we had on last week who was. Who had to go off and go and get his daughter who'd had an operation. So we've got him back this week because we didn't get to talk to him about the issues that we were going to talk about. But thank you very much as well to Super Leeds for jumping in, and we'll definitely have you back on at some point, probably when you've had a few less vinos, and that's your own words, not my words. So I'll see you tomorrow night. Don't forget, we're going to keep doing Mondays and Tuesdays for as long as we can, and any chance we get. Remember the sovereign state of Good Hope. Keep remembering to mention that to people, and also mention Jeremy Bamber to people as well. The Jeremy Bamber case. Just keep planting seeds, little by little. So thanks very much for listening. Take it easy. We'll see you again tomorrow night. Ta-ra a bit.
I am a 1 in 10, a number on a list. I am a 1 in 10, even though I don't exist. Nobody knows me, but I'm always there. Statistical reminder of a world that doesn't care. Arms unfold the dough, cue malnutrition dulls my hair. My eyes are black and lifeless with an unprivileged stare. I'm the beggar on the corner, will no one spare a dime? I'm the child that never learned to read, cause no one spared the time. I am a 1 in 10, a number on a list. I am a 1 in 10, even though I don't exist. Nobody knows me, but I'm always there. Statistical reminder of a world that doesn't care. Murderer, the victim, I'm a license to a gun. I'm a sad, bruised old lady in an alley or in a slum. I'm a middle-aged businessman with chronic heart disease. I'm another teenage suicide in a street that has no trees. I am a 1 in 10, a number on a list. I am a 1 in 10, even though I don't exist. Nobody knows me, but I'm always there. Statistical reminder of a world that doesn't care. Starving third world mother, refugee without a home. I'm a housewife hooked on Valium, a pensioner alone. I'm a cancer-ridden specter, discovering the earth. I'm another hungry baby, I'm an accident at birth. I am a 1 in 10, a number on a list. I am a 1 in 10, even though I don't exist. Nobody knows me, but I'm always there. Statistical reminder of a world that doesn't care. I am a 1 in 10, a number on a list. I am a 1 in 10, even though I don't exist. Nobody knows me, but I'm always there. Statistical reminder of a world that doesn't care. I am a 1 in 10, a number on a list. I am a 1 in 10, even though I don't exist. Nobody knows me, but I'm always there. Statistical reminder of a world that doesn't care.